The Dead Sea is located on the eastern boundary of Israel, about a 45-minute drive from Jerusalem, some 1,300 feet below sea level. The mountain stronghold of Masada is located on its southern shore, while the ruins of a small community called Qumran can be found on its northern shore. The Dead Sea is only 11 miles wide, containing 70% water and 30% solid salt. That's 10 times the salt content found in ocean water. Nothing lives in this sea. The ruins of Qumran, overlooking the Dead Sea, were once the home of these wilderness people. In 1953, this little village was found among the bleak, cavern-pitted cliffs of the adjoining mountains. This is the Judean wilderness, and it is here that a few years earlier, in 1947, a Bedouin boy threw a stone through the opening of a cave, and, hearing the sound of breaking pottery, entered the cave, witnessing for the first time in 2,000 years the hidden treasure of this Qumran community. He had discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. 45 years later, archaeologists and language experts are still looking, still trying to piece together an amazing puzzle of international proportions. Dr. James Tabor of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte is one of a team of experts who has returned with modern-age radar equipment in hopes of finding some answers. This ground scan radar is used to find cavities in the rock which may not be seen with the naked eye, cavities that could contain more scrolls.
We're right in the area where all the materials have been found. Not only have materials been found right here behind us, but also on down towards En-Gedi and other wadis have been found materials. It's a very rich area. From 100 years before the time of Jesus to about 150 years after, Jewish religious refugees, let's call them, were coming out into this desert, living, hiding, working, and they've left stuff. They've left scrolls, they've left their remains. Let's say you go in a cave and it looks really promising. Roman pottery, fire marks on the wall, clearly inhabited from the period, and you have 3 to 4 meters of bat dung and debris. We are modern archaeologists. What do? We don't just take our team in with masks and start digging and sweating. We take the ground scan in, run it around the floor of the cave.
The most famous cave in this drama is cave number 4, jutting out from the cliff where the tourists can see, as if it had something special to share. I talked with Professor Tabor about this cave and about the whole issue of secrecy.
There were 800 fragments of scrolls found in that cave, and very little of that material came out until last week.
Well, I can almost infer from what you're saying that somebody read these texts and said, I don't think we should release these things.
There are all kinds of conspiracy theories that have been proposed, theories just about scholarly jealousies, who gets to have their name on these texts. There's been alcoholism involved, there's been incompetence, there's been all sorts of things. It's not a pretty story, but everybody involved is not the bad and everybody's not good. But it's a mess. Everybody agrees it's a mess.
Well, sure, and it is in the average office too, but 20 centuries we've waited for this.
I'll give you an example. The group of other documents called the Nag Hammadi materials were found about the same time. You can get numerous editions now in English of all of the material. It was brought out rather quickly. And with these materials, it wasn't. So what happened, and actually it took until the 80s until the pressure really began to build. Mm-hmm. And Herschel Shanks, the editor of Biblical Archaeology Review, spearheaded a lot of this effort. But great deal of public pressure. The public began to get interested in the late 80s, if you recall.
Boy, it takes a while.
As the word got out, people didn't know. 40% of the Dead Sea Scrolls aren't out. People began to say, well, I thought everything was out. What happened finally is that Professor Robert Eisenman at California State Long Beach obtained the photographs, not through any source that officially was given them. In fact, we're not even sure if he hasn't told me for protection reasons. I'm not even sure he knows where they came from. But he and James Robinson, the editors of this volume that we looked at on the previous
program. Not the
program.
evangelist James Robinson,
No,
but James Robinson.
James Robinson,
okay.
Who's a very, very well-known scholar from Claremont School. Just simply, I guess you could call this the bootleg edition.
Mm-hmm.
They simply put this out. These two volumes bring us up to date. In other words, with these materials I have here that were already out, and these materials, all the material is out. The problem is this is still in Hebrew. It still is raw material. It's got to be carefully looked at.
For over 40 years now, the group given credit for writing the scrolls was called Essenes. But Professor Robert Eisenman of the California State University at Long Beach, who has spearheaded much of the recent research, has a different theory.
In 1952, a document called the Copper Scroll was found. And this was a scroll that really worried the people who were promoting a theory that we know as the Essene theory, because the Essene theory became the official theory of the group that was controlling the non-biblical texts. And the basis of the Essene theory was to press the documents as far away from Christian origins as possible and render this group that was intrinsic to the development of Christian thinking in Palestine as a pietistic, quietist, more or less politically uninvolved meditative group. But with the Copper Scroll, which were two scrolls punched into metal, revealed when they were finally opened, and there was a huge political struggle to get them opened, was that we had the temple treasure list here. And you said, well, what would that matter? It mattered because this pietist, quietist, retiring group that was apolitical, etc., why would they be interested in the temple, first of all, and why would they have a temple treasure list? And what it implied was that we had a group here who was, in fact, not this pietist retiring group, but a more activist, militant, aggressive group, probably connected with the uprising against Rome. And the temple treasure list that we found in Cave 3 probably related to the attempts by the revolutionaries to sequester the temple treasure in the face of the coming Roman armies. And that linked this group very closely to the uprising against Rome from 66 to 70. We feel that this movement, the movement we have here, is really the better name for it than Essene or even Zealot, is the Messianic movement in Palestine. We've said that this literature is tremendously messianic. At the beginning, we were seeing documents having to do with two messiahs, but we were also seeing documents having to do with a single Judeo-Christian style Davidic Messiah too. And in the unpublished materials, we're even seeing more of this kind of material relating to a kind of normative Judeo-Christian Davidic style single Messiah. And if you read your Josephus, the historian of this period who wrote the Jewish war carefully, you'll see that Josephus says in one passage of his book about the war against Rome that the thing that most moved the Jewish people to revolt against Rome was the prophecy that a world ruler would come out of Palestine. That tells us that they were moved by the messianic prophecy, and that the revolution against Rome that we often think of political was in fact not simply political, but religious and messianic. We think we have here the literature of the movement. We don't say it began in the first century. It leads up from the Maccabean period in the 2nd century BC on up through the Herodian period into the 1st century. We think we have here the literature of the messianic movement. And in my work, I have said that the last stages of this literature and the last stages of this movement, which is the project I came to Israel to research in 85, is parallel to the Jerusalem community, that community known in the New Testament as the Jerusalem Church, the Jerusalem community of James the Just, sometimes called in Christian tradition the brother of Jesus.
Just as at Masada, a few miles south, the people here knew how to preserve their precious water supply. The winter rains came down the mountainsides and filled the large cisterns and then passed through elaborate channels to pools throughout various parts of the complex. little bath, the mikveh, was used in ceremonial cleansing. They would enter here and dip themselves under the water. It was much like the baptism that John the Baptist preached in this very same wilderness, here where the Jordan River meets the Dead Sea. These people were Jews. They rose to pray before dawn, and they held to the Sabbath rigorously. They had a community council of 12 with an inner group of 3. Jesus, of course, had 12 disciples, and that inner group of 3, Peter, James, and John. The Qumran group had sacred meals with prayers, much like the Last Supper or communion. They talked about the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, and about the last days. In the year 68 AD, fearing the oncoming Roman troops and certain plunder, they took their scrolls and hid them in the caves up on the nearby cliffs.
I think there's a lot at stake. What's at stake is the Jews are going to have to learn, and will learn, I think, from more finds, that Messianic Judaism is a acceptable form of Jewish faith, because here it is here. Now, I'm using Messianic Judaism in the general term, Jews who believe in a Messiah, that many Jews have, they think someone's the Messiah and so forth, and that is not leaving the Jewish faith to believe somebody's the Messiah. And so Jews will come to know a wider view of Judaism than just the rabbinic view, which is one stream of Judaism. But there are many streams of Judaism. And this stream of Judaism is quite an important one. And I think the Christians in the West will learn from this that the real roots of their faith are out here in this desert with these people who are very serious about the Word of God and the promises of God and the prophecies and so on. And we're not interested at all in Greco-Roman philosophy and secular culture. I think the Christians will see, as more connections are made, that this is actually the birthplace of Christianity.
Your setup wants Opera GX, and you're holding it back. Download Opera GX.
Essentially, we have the facts and the theories. The facts are that in these 11 caves behind us and to the north, were found up to 1,200 scrolls. Now some are in fragments, but 1,200 books, let's say, scattered about. And also behind us is some kind of a community that's been excavated, complex. Do the two go together? Those are the facts. And the theories would be everything from their Essenes to their Zealots. These are ancient Jewish groups. Some people even suggested they're, quote, Christians, unquote. I think if you connect the excavation site to the scrolls, you certainly would say that they were this wilderness messianic movement. That is, they're waiting for the Jewish Messiah. They're out in the wilderness trying to be pure, to withdraw from the corruption of the culture, the Greco-Roman culture with the Romans and Jerusalem being defiled by a corrupt priesthood. Everybody out here agreed on one thing: we hate the religious establishment up the hill.
We have, for instance, a very law-oriented group here. We have a very militant, aggressive group here. We have a very nationalistic group here. We have a very xenophobic group here. That is, they don't like foreigners. In Christianity that we normally think about, we think of a cosmopolitan, non-law, Gentile-oriented Christianity. So the kind of group we have here is quite different than what we normally think. We also have an anti-Pharisee group here of extreme proportions, and probably anti-rabbinic group, the successors to the Pharisees. And that is another thing that's somewhat gummed up the works, because really this is a third way. This is not the rabbinic Jewish way. This is not the Pauline Christian way. This is more of an apocalyptic, even evangelical, if you like, a more of an apocalyptic zealot way.
This group believed that prophecy, biblical prophecy, is being fulfilled before their eyes. So they would open their holy books and then look out and say, yeah, this is what the prophet speaks of right here. And so they would write almost as something would happen. Like the text that got so much attention in November, the Wounded Messiah text. That could very well be a reaction to one of the leaders who got killed. In that sense, they would be writing it on the spot.
Do you see some of the stuff written in the scrolls related to Jesus?
Very much so. But I think he broke with this community. I don't know that he was ever a part of it, but I think he would have not agreed with it on what we call halakhic matters. Those who know Judaism know that word, but it means matters of Jewish law. I would put it like this. Jesus seems to share all the major ideas of the group, such as they talk about a new covenant. In fact, I think a good name for these people, rather than Essenes, is the Wilderness New Covenanters, but it's too hard to say. They talk about a new covenant. They have baptisms, or mikvahs. They have dippings, water dippings. They believe that they're out in the wilderness waiting for the Messiah. They have a community of 12, a council of 12, and then an inner group of 3. And if you recall in the Gospels, Jesus chooses 12, and then Peter, James, and John are the inner group of 3, that he quite often goes off alone with. They have sacred meals. They denounce the religious establishment and so forth. I listed out one time 24 parallels like that, where the ideas are just, they talk about the Holy Spirit, we are the people of the last days, and so forth. But then when you look at their practices, these people would not talk to Gentiles. I don't think they would even have given them the time of day. Jesus, according to the Gospels, encounters Gentiles and actually deals with them. The Roman, centurion, the Samaritan woman. If you remember the story of the Samaritan woman, the disciples come up and say, "You're talking with her?" They're shocked that he would be talking with not only a Gentile, but a woman. So these people would, I think, have denounced him for that. And yet their basic ideas of be pure, prepare the way of the Lord in the wilderness, the new covenant is coming, the Messiah is coming. They're very big and very strong in talking about the chosen ones. We are the elect, the chosen ones. I think this is the birth of the movement out here, not in the city. Jesus is from Galilee. He's rural. I think he's wilderness oriented, and people don't notice in the Gospels he goes out to the wilderness. Most people would say, if you ask, when did Jesus go out here? And they'd say, well, the temptation. And he went back and lived like a city boy. That's not the case. The last winter of his life, which I think was maybe the year 29, he's in Jerusalem for Hanukkah. It's winter. And according to the Gospel of John, the Pharisees and the religious establishment got together, and they were going to have Jesus stoned for blasphemy. And this is 6 months before they finally got him. And it says, and this is I think it's in John 11 or so, that he retreated into the wilderness.
Here's how savvy investors are getting the government to send them tax checks.
This is a hidden gem that people...
Where John had been baptizing up on the Jordan. So he came out here. And it says, and those who wish came to him. Now I interpret this that he's living in a cave somewhere out here. And he stays all winter. I mean, this is a new image of Jesus living in a cave, hiding out. Why is he hiding out? Because they're going to kill him. But he doesn't run home to Nazareth. He comes out here. And, you can't prove these things, but what did he do from age 12 to age 29? He didn't study in Jerusalem with the rabbis like Paul did. I think we could say that. Or they would have known him and he would be a student of Gamaliel or something. I think he must have been out here with John. I don't know all the time, but must have spent time out here studying the scriptures and thinking about what he felt he had to do. So he comes back, and then it becomes very imaginative. Where would you go? Well, you'd go where it's safe, and you look up and you see hundreds and hundreds of caves. And then it says, and as I said, those who wanted came to him. So the movement has a kind of espionage character to it. And it's certain people of the group knew where he was. They would come and deal. And I picture him almost like Bar Kokhba, but it's not a military mission, it's a spiritual mission, sending out emissaries from his cave, directing various followers. Well, we need to get ready for this and that, and here's the plan. And that's the side that we don't think about till you come here. It makes it much more vivid. I mean, all historians imagine things, but, we have the Dead Sea behind us, the head of the Jordan water. To say that Jesus didn't know about this community, I think, is to say that somehow he would be, either blind or mentally incompetent. Of course, he knew about it. Now, did he come and eat and have friendly relations with them? Possibly growing up, I think so. Luke says that John the Baptist, his cousin, was Ba Mitbar in the wilderness until his revealing, when he was probably also about 29 years old, 27, 28, 29, in the wilderness. Well, where do you live out here, you see? So I think John the Baptist must have spent much time here. Maybe Jesus would come and visit and then begin arguing with them. Well, I don't know, you people say that we should not even talk to Gentiles, and yet the message needs to reach the whole world. I suspect they would say, well, wait till the Messiah comes and it will. And he might say something like, maybe it's time. This is what I imagine. But I think he was here, for sure.
Do you see any parallels that relate to these days today?
The biggest parallel would be that there are Jews, once again, who are messianic, and I mean that in the most general sense. That is, who are talking about when is the Messiah coming? Now, this could be everything from Jewish Hasid groups like Lubavitch, who are talking all the time now about this is the time of the Messiah, he's coming. In fact, they thought he was going to come, this year. So we're definitely in what I call apocalyptic messianic times. Also, for the first time, really, we have large numbers of Jews trying to reclaim Jesus as a Jew. That hasn't happened before. See, when the Jews are scattered in Europe and Christians come to them with crosses in their face and say, we're getting ready to kill you in the name of this, you're not going to get a lot of converts to that religion. But now we're in a time where when you're in the land and it's safe, relatively safe, people can think again, you see. And they can say, we're here and we're regathered. And I think scholars have already done this. Most people don't know, but most scholars would say, where does Jesus belong? He belongs within Judaism. He's a great Jewish teacher, sage, prophet. This is where he belongs. When you historically plot someone, he's not a Greek, he's not a Roman, he's a Jew. And Jews are hesitant. As you know, the Orthodox won't even say his name without a slight curse to it. But that's who they're cursing, though, I don't think is Yeshua, the true Yeshua, the historical Yeshua. They're cursing an imagined horrible person that really was not Jesus at all, but the God of the pagan Christian church. So, in a way, let them curse him if they could also understand. And I'm still speaking historically. I mean, I think even a historian, truth is truth, and he belongs here with his people. I think he ought to come home too. And the scrolls and I believe that. Now, that goes beyond, is he the Messiah? Is he the Son of God? These are theological questions that can be discussed. But the first thing is to de-paganize him, get him back in the land, show that he was a Jew. And he is the most influential man in world history.
Eve Online is a vast universe. What
do you think happened to the people here?
What we think happened is when the war broke out, the Jewish war with the Romans in the year 66, that everybody had to decide what they're going to do. It's like Israelis today, which side are you on in terms of, the political questions and so on? Well, they had their political questions sharply divided. There were Roman collaborators, there were Roman resistors. The religious communities had to take a stand. There's a war going on. People are dying. Romans are systematically, they're going to come down this road, whatever road there was, everybody's wanting to go to Masada, down south. It's the big fortress. If you hold that, you can help hold out for the whole. So I think what happened in terms of the archaeological evidence is the Romans got this place and wiped it out, killed everybody.
In your opinion, concerning these scrolls, what's at stake here for Christianity and Judaism?
We have a theory, and we've had it from the beginning, and what we're seeing confirms our theory more and more rather than makes us doubt it. That is, we feel that this movement, the movement we have here, is really the better name for it than Essene or even Zealot is the Messianic movement in Palestine. We've said that this literature is tremendously messianic. At the beginning, we were seeing documents having to do with two messiahs, but we were also seeing documents having to do with a single Judeo-Christian style Davidic messiah too. And in the unpublished materials, we're even seeing more of this kind of material relating to a kind of normative Judeo-Christian Davidic style single messiah. And if you read your Josephus, the historian of this period who wrote the Jewish war carefully, you'll see that Josephus says in one passage of his book about the war against Rome that the thing that most moved the Jewish people to revolt against Rome was the prophecy that a world ruler would come out of Palestine. That tells us that they were moved by the messianic prophecy, and that the revolution against Rome that we often think of political was in fact not simply political, but religious and messianic. We think we have here the literature of the movement. We don't say it began in the 1st century. It leads up from the Maccabean period in the 2nd century BC on up through the Herodian period into the 1st century. We think we have here the literature of the messianic movement.
I think there's a lot at stake. What's at stake is the Jews are going to have to learn, and will learn, I think, from more finds, that Messianic Judaism is a acceptable form of Jewish faith, because here it is here. Now, I'm using Messianic Judaism in the general term, Jews who believe in a Messiah, that many Jews have, they think someone's the Messiah and so forth, and that is not leaving the Jewish faith to believe somebody's the Messiah. And so Jews will come to know a wider view of Judaism than just the rabbinic view, which is one stream of Judaism. But there are many streams of Judaism. And this stream of Judaism is quite an important one. And I think the Christians in the West will learn from this that the real roots of their faith are out here in this desert with these people who are very serious about the Word of God and the promises of God and the prophecies and so on. And we're not interested at all in Greco-Roman philosophy and secular culture. I think the Christians will see, as more connections are made, that this is actually the birthplace of Christianity. Not just the land of Israel, but a messianic desert group of Jews who are waiting for the Messiah to come.
Messiah, could he be Messiah? The one whom the prophets foretold.
What happened was back in 1985-86, I was the National Endowment for the Humanities, American Schools of Oriental Research professor in residence at the Albright School in Jerusalem, the famous American school. And I came here to do research on the parallels between the early Christian community in Jerusalem and the Qumran community. But I was not able to do any research because they had all the scrolls sequestered, and there was nothing new we could do in Jerusalem that we couldn't do back in California. So when we saw what that situation was and that we basically wasted a whole year, we began to get very anxious about the access situation to the scrolls, and we started this campaign. And in 1989, we officially wrote to Strugnell and then to who was then the new editor of the Scrolls International Committee, John Strugnell, and to Amir Drury, who was the new director of the Department of Antiquities in Israel. We officially asked for access to hitherto sequestered scrolls, and we found that they were not going to give us access. Our intention at that time was to do a court case in the Supreme Court. The import of that desire to do that had been to push them forward to open up the situation more. At that time, I began to receive pictures. People began from sources seeing my position on the point of the struggle to free up access to the scrolls. Pictures began to come to me from unidentified sources that I'm not at liberty to tell. And I suppose the reason I was singled out was because they figured I'd know what to do with them. And they were right. I did know what to do with them. And my intent from the beginning was to
I told you I was done with these browsers.
publish all the scrolls, have free access for everybody. I never liked this idea that only qualified scholars, because the moment you get into the idea of qualified, then they say, well, who's qualified? He's qualified and he isn't. Professor Golb in Chicago, who was a great scholar in his own right, because he disagrees with this professor over here, they can say he isn't qualified. Or a fundamentalist Christian, or someone who believes in the word of the Bible or something like that, because they don't like his theories about what he thinks about the Bible, then they say that he's a fanatic or a crazy. We're not going to give him access. That's not the way scientific endeavor moves forward. Scientific endeavor moves forward by free information. We began to see that the whole thing was kind of peculiar, and we began to look into the origins of what happened. And that goes back into the whole history of how the scrolls were found, who found them, and the process of finding. And your audience or your listeners or viewers may not know, the first scrolls were found in the middle of the Arab-Israeli struggle in 1947. And those scrolls, one way or another, found their way into the hands of the Israelis. And most people thought that was all the scrolls there were. That was considered or called Cave 1. As the caves were revealed, they got numbers in the order, chronological order in which they were found. So the scrolls from Cave 1 made their way ultimately into a institution in Israel known as the Museum of the Book. So when they got into that, and at that time the Israelis did not try to make any political capital out of them. They didn't try to build scholarly empires. They published everything. They didn't publish final editions with commentaries. They let everyone have free access, and that was the right way to proceed. However, after that began to happen, more scrolls came in. At that time, the partition of Palestine occurred. Those were caves 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, et cetera, on up to 14. So between 1949 and 1956, a whole new other group of scrolls were coming in. But by that time, the area was under Jordanian administration. These were Hebrew, Aramaic documents. Before the rise of Islam, the Jordanians were not particularly interested in them. So who in East Jerusalem was Johnny on the spot take over the situation? As it turned out, there was a churchman. His name was Roland DeVoe. He was the head of the Dominican order in Palestine. He wore 2 hats. He also was head of a school of French Vatican archaeology known as the École Biblique. He was the one the Jordanians, or he turned to the Jordanians, or vice versa. In any case, between the two of them, Father DeVoe basically took the documents off the Jordanians' hands. And in this process, he developed what he called an international committee. It was only international in name only, because first of all, it was always Judenrein. That is, no Jew could ever be part of this committee. So it was a fiction of an international committee, but on the whole, it was dominated by churchmen. For the few non-church or Protestant scholars that were part of this committee, there was always more cleric-type monastic individuals who were part of this committee. That is, the principal people were Father DeVoe himself, a man called Father Milik, another man called Father Starkey, and in the present generation, they have been succeeded by a father called Emil Puech. He is the reigning Dominican father at the present time. What we discovered that there was a kind of fiction developed here. That is, there were 2 kinds of scrolls that were coming in, and this is very difficult for your viewers maybe to understand. One were biblical texts of the Bible, old texts that showed that the Bible as we had it was basically the same text that was operating then. But there was another group of texts that were actually even more interesting. People would have thought the biblical texts were the most interesting. In fact, they weren't. There were new texts no one ever saw before, what we called sectarian text or non-biblical text. These texts always seems to go to these clerics. That is, the Protestants of the committee, on the whole, were given the biblical texts. They were represented primarily by a man, Frank Cross, at Harvard, but the other texts basically went into the hands of Millick and this individual that we now know, Strugnell, and some others of that kind, Father Starkey. And basically they were getting the most interesting text because they were interested to see from this period what was happening. So what developed was an information management policy. Like any institution, information is always managed in one way or the other. And their basic desire was to play down, reduce the interest in the scrolls, and to make it look like we had documents that were not of the most incredible importance for the history of early Christianity in Palestine.
This is Purdue University. This is where the work starts. This is where the best ideas create a...
So what happened between the early 60s and the present was that basically all the Protestant members were pushed off of the committee. Allegra was pushed off of the committee. A man called Hunziker in Germany was pushed off of the committee. The individual from England that we referred to, John Strugnell, converted to Catholicism. And basically you had a committee dominated by churchmen and clerics. And that was the situation up to the mid-'80s when we began, as I said, to see this weird situation where we had utter secrecy and no one was allowed to see anything. And when we began to agitate, the strange thing is that we ran up against the Israeli authorities. And you might say, how come the Israeli authorities got into it? Well, a very peculiar thing happened. In 1965, John Allegra, who had been fired from the committee by the others, because he was English, had great influence with the Jordanian authorities. And at that time, the Jordanians themselves were getting very fed up with what they were witnessing as far as the secrecy of this committee. John Allegro prevailed upon the king and his associates to nationalize the material in the East Jerusalem area in the Rockefeller Museum. And so in 1966, right before the Six-Day War, the Jordanian government nationalized the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Rockefeller Museum as a preliminary step towards taking control away from this church-dominated group and giving it to a more open scholarly group. The Israelis conquered the area in 1967. They benefited from John Allegro's pressure on the Jordanian government. That is, the Israelis now succeeded to the ownership of the scrolls because the Jordanians had nationalized them. But the Israelis knew nothing about all of this conflict that had gone on before. And so they basically gave the International Committee a new lease on life. So we had 20 more years of secrecy now under Israeli sponsorship. When the Israelis began to realize what was going on in 1986, 87, and 88, and under our pressure began to introduce their own people, then they became sensitive because they said to the world at large, look, we've just got our people into this now. How come you're just taking it away from us? And that was the basic approach of the Israeli establishment, of the newspapers in Israel, and so on. But our response to that was simple. It was too little, too late. The time had come for open access to all scholars without differentiation. Achieved that this year, 3 events. 1, the computerized reconstruction of the unpublished transcripts. 2, the opening of the Huntington Library files, for which I was a consultant, and I was the first scholar to be allowed in to see the Huntington Library files. And 3, our final publication of the complete facsimile edition of all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which we did in November, which included all the pictures that had been coming to us since 1989, approximately 1,800 plates. As far as we're concerned, the whole controversy is over.
Now that the latest scrolls have been released, where does the search for new material go from here? We'll explore that question with Professor James Tabor.
Johnson, what's the motive like in here?
Who are you guys? Forensics team is off in the new Call of Duty Black Ops 7.
Can you tell us about what you're doing here today?
Our purpose is twofold. First, we have permission. You have to get permission to do anything over here. We have permission from the Israelis, from the Department of Antiquities, to survey, to do a cave survey from Jericho north of here all the way down to En Gedi. And we're right in the area where all the materials have been found. Not only have materials been found right here behind us, but also on down towards En-Gedi and other wadis have been found materials. It's a very rich area. From 100 years before the time of Jesus to about 150 years after, Jewish religious refugees, let's call them, were coming out into this desert, living, hiding, working. And they've left stuff. They've left scrolls, they've left their remains. So the biggest thing we're doing is every day our teams go out in the morning. We're divided into teams. They've been given a kilometer down the highway, and they map every single cave. And as you can see, driving up the road, we're speaking about thousands of caves. We have very detailed maps like this, which take each kilometer block. And we've taken each kilometer, like my kilometer is 253 south. I've been working on it for a week now. That means we go up in all the cliffs. You have to go up. What you do is you first map them from ground as you can see them, then you start going up. What often happens though is you get up there and you'll see something you couldn't see from the ground. Like the area I happen to be in has 5 plateaus. And we discovered various caves and things that you cannot see until you get to the next level. The other thing that happens is you'll see a narrow slit, maybe a meter high, and you think, well, that's just what we call an animal hole, or maybe a mountain lion hangs out there. But you get up to it and look in, and it's a narrow opening into a whole cave, you see. Now, those are the type you miss, but actually that the zealots and the messianic believers and so on would have wanted to find most, because that's exactly what the Romans would think. Like, well, there's nothing there. Like the scrolls found in Cave 1, I mentioned earlier, small opening, you couldn't see. We will then begin systematic exploration. This will go over several years of all the caves that look promising. This is a very lengthy thing. See, what has happened is when the scrolls were discovered by the Bedouins, the Europeans got involved, Father DeVoe and the Catholic team especially. But it was mainly treasure hunting, like scurry up these caves, look in them all quickly, let's hope we find something, then we can sell it to the Europeans for so much per centimeter. This is what it finally came down to. They brought it like in shoe boxes full. Here I found these. Where did you find those? Oh, in a cave over there. Sometimes we're not even sure where this material came from, you see. So we think there are still materials here and we want to find them. And we think they relate to the wilderness communities that were out here during all of these periods. And I would think perhaps there are materials from the Jesus movement. Now that would be a find. Nothing outside the New Testament has ever been found from the 1st century.
What happens when they don't?
How many are down there?
All they got evidence of is that Gacy was illegally operating a graveyard.